Sometimes life gives us lemons. Sometimes it gives us lemonade. Other times it gives us something entirely out of left field that makes us say, WTF. But no matter what obstacles come, there is most often a way out on the other side, and we are once again victorious. My name is Dr. Rowe, and you are listening to my podcast about resilience. Every guest shares a tragedy to triumph story to give listeners like you the inspiration to push through every single day. Listen now as my next guest shares how they were Lifejacked.
What do you do when the parenting model you have doesn't provide the blueprint for success? My name is Dr. Rowe, and this is Lifejacked, the Resilience Podcast. Lifejacked is when an unfortunate or unplanned event happens to jack with your life. My guest for this week, Maria Riegger, will share how she navigated life as the eldest of 3 children after her father was killed in a motor vehicle accident. Maria is a lawyer, author, and parenting expert. She helps parents navigate the challenges of parenthood and provides strategies to break the cycles of toxic parenting. Maria is the mother of a teenage son and lives in the Washington, D.C. area. Listen as she shares how you, too, can break cycles of toxic parenting and how much our astrological sign may influence our parenting behavior. Hi, Maria. Welcome. Thank you so much for being a guest on my show. How are you?
Hi, Dr. Rowe. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here.
Maria, one day your father went out and never came back. Can you share a bit about this tragic time in your life?
Right. So it essentially ended my childhood. I was 11 years old at the time. And as you said, the oldest of 3 kids. And almost immediately I was thrust into more of an adult parenting role because my mother, who had been a stay-at-home mom, had to go get a job, wasn't home a lot at the time because she was working and getting her master's so she could earn more money. And that meant I was taking care of my younger siblings, getting them dinner. When I got my license, I right away started taking my siblings everywhere, taking them to school, taking them to doctor's appointments. So at 11 years old, essentially my childhood was over. One of the reasons why I kind of think of myself as a big kid now, I like to have fun and do stuff because I didn't get to do that as a kid, you know. I remember getting my license and all my peers were hooting and hollering, and I was like, I took it very seriously because I knew it meant that I had more responsibilities. Now, I don't think that was a good thing for an adolescent to take on adult level responsibilities. It's very burdensome and it parentifies the child, which is a whole kind of an unhealthy dynamic. But that's what happened essentially. So it's hard to overstate the effect that had on me.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I mean, I'm also the eldest of 3 children. I have 2 younger sisters. Well, of course, I had both my mother and stepfather in my home. And I did help my mom out. I, would wash meat or season it or put it on before she got home and all of that, or cook the sides. But yeah, I didn't have to take them to doctor's appointments and all of that.
Right.
Wow. Like, talk about being life-jacked at a young age, because definitely your life was definitely jacked at that time. And so I was going to ask, was there resentment, or did you just know that, I had to help my mom because I'm the oldest and that's just my responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the thick of it, I think it was more just, I just need to do what needs to be done. And I wanted my own time. I'm a big introvert, so I am very comfortable on my own, in my own space, with my own thoughts. I like to read and do a lot of solo activities. I didn't get a lot of that because I had all these, responsibilities. So I did feel burdened by that. I probably didn't feel resentment until much later, but I did feel burdened by that I didn't get to have my own life and do my own things because I had all these responsibilities, right? But definitely, yeah, that was a factor.
You describe your mother as a narcissistic abuser. Now, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so that's books have been written on this, right? So I'll try to give a high-level overview. Narcissistic abuse, and the term narcissist is thrown around a lot. Okay, so when I use it, I'm talking about somebody who actually meets the diagnostic criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. And to my knowledge, my mother has never been diagnosed with this. So my feeling on this is through my own healing work and with my therapist, who first put NPD on my radar. But essentially, a narcissist is characterized by a lack of empathy, and they have either a complete inability or find it very difficult to actually think about something from the other person's point of view. So it's extremely ego-oriented. The narcissist is a deeply insecure individual, not comfortable with their own thoughts. They really cannot stand to be alone with their own thoughts because they are so insecure. And that leads them to do a lot of attention-seeking behavior and to manipulate. And that's where the gaslighting comes in. A narcissist, gaslighting is a term usually associated with people with NPD, because in order to retain the narcissistic supply and keep people, such as children, dependent on them so that they can feel better about themselves, they'll gaslight the other person, try to make the other person question their own intuition, question their own reality, and that's very damaging. So when you have a narcissistic parent with a child, I mean, there's a kind of power imbalance there because the parent is an authority figure. So I find that this dynamic is especially insidious because the child grows up, they don't really know, they kind of sense that something is wrong or off, but they can't really put a finger on what's going on because the children instinctively want to please parents. Even adolescents and teens, it doesn't seem like it, but they do. They want to instinctively please parents. And the narcissist always makes love and affection conditional. Like, I'm only going to grant love and affection or approval if you do things I approve of. And as we know, that kind of unconditional love and affection just sets the stage for the child to grow into an adult who reproduces those relationships. Obviously, a very unhealthy dynamic. You don't want to be doing things you're not comfortable with in order to get love and attention from people. So those are kind of the main things. A narcissist parent thinks of the child as an extension of themselves, even when the child's an adult, and they want the kids to make them look good, right? It's about making them look good and making them feel better about themselves. And they don't respect boundaries. Narcissists are always going to try to violate boundaries, and that to the other person becomes extremely energy sapping because it takes so much energy to constantly reinforce your boundaries and push back, right? The narcissist will say things like, oh, I'd like to come over and help you at the house today. And you'll say, no, you don't need to come over. Well, I'd like to come over. I just said you don't need to come over. I know I don't need to come over, but I want to come over. Don't come over. I don't want you to come over. Oh, well, you don't have to be so, angry about it. They'll try to kind of weasel their way, but in a way that makes them look good. So it's very complex.
No, most definitely. And, it's interesting because our parents are supposed to be the people that we look to for advice or comfort or empathy, like you said, and to have a parent who has a lack of empathy or likes to gaslight you or put their kid in a respect of conditionality, right? Like, oh, okay, like you said, as long as you do this, as long as you behave this way, then I'm here for you. But the minute that you don't do something the way that I want you to do it, then I'm going to pull back. So then I want to ask, did you have a support system or at least someone you could talk to growing up? Because that seems like you had a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Yeah, no, I had nobody. I always did well in school academically because I love learning, and I always was ambitious. So usually, when somebody's getting good grades and doesn't have too many absences, the teacher just assumes everything's okay. There was no one I felt comfortable talking to. And I don't think anyone would have believed me because this type of stuff is hard to show, right? I did see a therapist for a while because the doctor suggested it, but my mother was not happy about that. Because again, the narcissist uses the kids to make the narcissist look good. So when the kids are imperfect or damaged or need therapy, it's a poor reflection on the narcissist. This is from the point of view of the narcissist, right? So it was more like, my mother's attitude was more like, just fix my daughter so she could be normal, as opposed to, you're having a hard time, let's find you some help. So, I grew up thinking there was stuff wrong with me, and I did not have anybody, but I'm a very strong, resilient person, and I was determined to be independent and break free.
So you finished law school, which I'd like to commend you on that. That's an amazing accomplishment.
Thank you.
And you were practicing law. So you had a career, right? So how did you get into giving parenting advice?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I still practice law and I enjoy it. I like what I do. A lot of things were happening at the same time. So when I had my son and I had him unexpectedly in law school, I got pregnant with him in law school. And when I had him and started to parent him, I realized I was not parenting in a way I was comfortable with. My default kind of parenting method, I had a lot to learn, that the way I was parenting, it wasn't always good for our relationship and our connection. And I instinctively knew that my connection with him was very important. I had to preserve that, especially as he got older. So that's kind of what fast-tracked my healing journey, right? My acknowledgement that my own childhood had a lot of past trauma that I had to get over, and that my issues with parenting my son were not my son's issues, they were my issues I had to deal with. So I was working on that, and at the same time, because I'm a corporate attorney, I was learning a lot about, negotiation and persuasion and things like this. And interestingly, a lot of the skills I use in negotiation and high-stakes conversations professionally are almost directly transferable to relating with your kids. So I thought that was a really interesting connection. So yeah, that's kind of what started my whole journey into studying childhood development and studying how to be a better parent and raise emotionally healthy kids who don't have to deal with all the problems, for example, that I had to deal with and many parents have to deal with.
It's interesting that you were mentioning what you noticed with your son. And so there's an old adage that says you parent the way you were parented. Do you think this is instinctively true for most of us parents?
Yes, I think kind of for most of us, the default way is to parent how we were parented. However, I've talked to a lot of parents who, like myself, kind of had enough detachment to determine that we did not get what we needed as parents, or we did not get what we needed as kids from our parents, and we want to parent differently. And there are a lot of parents who instinctively know how to parent. Like, a mom instinctively knows that the baby needs her physical presence for connection, right? Most of us, not everyone, instinctively know that. So there's a lot of parental and maternal instincts that we recognize, but sometimes because of what we read or what people tell us, we go against that. But yeah, it's a tough journey because there are so many people who are going to tell you what to do and how to parent, and here's what you should do and here's what you shouldn't do. But what I tell parents is really listen to your instincts first and make sure you are preserving the connections with your kids, right? And the attachment with your kids. Because as like Dr. Gabor Mate, who's a trauma expert and a medical doctor, says, when children are faced with a conflict between attachment to the parents versus their own authenticity, they will choose attachment every time because they have to attach. So there are a lot of kids who grow up into adults who were not allowed to be authentic as kids, and then as adults, they're not living authentically, as you mentioned earlier, because they've been conditioned a certain way.
When did you realize you needed to do something different when it came to parenting your son? You mentioned it earlier.
Yeah.
But what was the exact moment? Like, what was happening?
We were having some argument in the kitchen. He was like 5 years old. He was really young. And he was upset, and he kind of pushed a plate of food on the floor, and I'm thinking, great, there's like one more thing I have to clean up, right? And I yelled at him, and he yelled back at me, like crying, like completely distressed. And I remember having this moment, like, oh my gosh, like I am not doing this right. Like, he's clearly distressed. Like, I get it. Like, I have to clean up this mess, but he's also distressed, and he's 5. I'm the adult. Like, the responsibility for this relationship is with me. It's not with him. You can't expect a 5-year-old to have the sophistication of an adult. I have to figure out what to do. And I was also very emotionally dysregulated, which is one of the hallmarks of people who are abused as children, right? Just complete, not being able to control and regulate their emotions. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to yell anymore. whatever it takes, whatever he does, whatever was going on. If I have to go into another room for a few minutes and calm down, that's what I'm going to do, but I'm not going to yell. And it took a while, almost a year of me doing that, like really just learning to emotionally regulate. And eventually he stopped having tantrums. Of course, he got older too, right? And more able to regulate himself. And then eventually he got to the point where he could calmly articulate things to me, like, I feel sad, or I feel like you didn't consider my feelings, things like this. And that was a huge coup for me, because that was obviously better for our relationship, because now we're communicating. And that it was okay if he was upset with me. He could be upset with me, he could be irritated with me, and he could tell me that, right? And I wouldn't freak out about it. But that was kind of the moment where I thought, I have to figure out what to do, because clearly I'm not doing this right.
I love that, and I can identify with that as well. I grew up in a household that had lots of yelling, and I realized in my own sons that I used to do a lot of yelling, and I just noticed, the effect that it was having on them. And I realized, just as you, why I don't have to yell at them to get my point across, or to let them know that I'm disappointed, or to ask them to do something after they have forgotten to do it. And you are right, the change in the behavior is amazing.
Right.
So it's like, it's a total 180. Like, it's a total, totally different. So, parents out there, if you're yelling, try to stop. Seriously, try to stop.
Right. I've talked to parents who said, well, if I'm not yelling, they're not listening. Okay, well, developmentally, adolescents and teens are very scatterbrained and very forgetful. That is completely developmentally normal. So I try to encourage parents to help them with kind of executive function things, such as remembering things and, triggers for when to do certain things or things like that. Help them make lists, give them an app, like a scheduling app or something, or find ways to help them remember, because yelling at them when they forget to do things doesn't help them remember the things.
Clearly. Yeah. So I want to go into this topic of toxic parenting.
Mm-hmm.
What all does that include? Like, what is toxic parenting? What does it look like?
Right. So, again, whole books have been written on this, right? So, toxic parenting can include anything from parents who were very emotionally immature when they interacted with the kids and were very passive aggressive, would criticize the kids in kind of a backhanded way, again, because the parents are very insecure and are projecting the insecurity on the kids. That's a very common dynamic I encounter. But when I think of toxic parenting, a lot of the times I think of a parent who has little to no respect for the child's sense of self and the child's separateness from the parent. Now that becomes really important when kids become adolescents and teens. Obviously, like toddlers, younger kids, we have to physically protect them, which includes tackling them if they run toward traffic and things like that. But as kids get older, they're expressing their independence and autonomy more and more, and that is developmentally normal, and that's what you want, because our goal is to raise, independent adults eventually, right? So that's kind of the number one thing I think of when the parent just doesn't have respect for the child's separateness as a separate sovereign being and sense of self. When the parent sees the kids as an extension of the parent and to make the parent look good and to do things for the parent. And that can be a cultural thing too. Like, I'm from a Latin family, so there's an element of that in a lot of Latin cultures, right? Where even adult children are considered, extensions of the parental unit. And also when I think of toxic parenting, I think of parents who are giving little to no emotional support and emotional validation. Things like saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or I don't understand why you feel that way, or just be happy. All of those things over time, suggest to the child they should be repressing their feelings, and that's not healthy either, right? You should be acknowledging the negative feelings along with the positive feelings. And I also consider two other things I'll point out in the context of toxic parenting. One is when parents punish children just for speaking their truth, even when they disagree with parents. Like, if a kid can't disagree with the parent and can't say no respectfully to the parent, who can the kid say no to, right? That's a big one for me. And I completely reject this idea that kids just should be abjectly obedient to parents and not able to self-champion and speak up for themselves. Because I cannot tell you how many women, adult women I've talked to that were raised like that allow themselves to be taken advantage of, including physically, because they thought they had to do what the other person wanted, because they were raised in a home where they were taught to be obedient and they, not to quote unquote talk back, which I hate that phrase, because talking back to me means a child who's standing up for themselves, self-championing, and that's what I want to do. In fact, I told my kid the other day, I said, look, if the only thing I ever teach you as a parent is to stand up for yourself, I will have done my job. So those are kind of the big things when I talk to parents especially parents who have been victims of childhood narcissistic abuse, those are a lot of the things that they had to deal with.
And you mentioned earlier you went to therapy.
Yes.
And of course, therapy is for healing. And a lot of times in therapy, they talk about forgiveness to people who have hurt you. Have you forgiven your mother, or at least made peace with her behavior from when you were a child?
Mostly, yes. And I realized that her behavior was because the result of her negative conditioning from her own mother. And I acknowledge that, and I understand that. However, as adults, we're responsible for our own healing. So, yeah, I've largely made peace with it, but I also have to keep my distance for my own self-protection.
Now, a lot of people think of child abuse as just strictly being physical abuse and not realizing like it could be emotional abuse, it could be verbal abuse, all types of abuse. It doesn't necessarily all types of abuse that can hurt us. It doesn't have to be something physical that really can mess with us. So how do you support parents who have experienced childhood abuse and they really want to break the cycle with their own children? I
have a YouTube channel where I publish a lot of free content on these topics. I have a whole playlist on narcissistic abuse recovery, and I interview experts in that area, experts on authenticity, on abuse recovery, on healing, things like that, on gentle parenting, peaceful parenting. And I do one-on-one coaching. I do parent coaching sessions, one-off parent coaching sessions. I also do, you mentioned astrology earlier. I actually do birth chart readings and relationship readings. And I also have a one-on-one coaching program that I open up like 2 to 3 times a year. If I only take like a handful of clients at a time, because it's a one-on-one coaching program for parents in this position, parents who are working on their own healing and reparenting themselves while simultaneously, learning how to parent their kids.
And you have written a few books on parenting as well, in addition to your YouTube channel. But your books especially relate to our sun signs or our astrological signs. Do you think the sun sign we are born under influences our parenting style just as much as our parenting models?
Yes. So the way I like to think about this is, most people agree that individuals were made up of energy, right? Like we'll say or consider, well, this person's energy doesn't vibe with mine, or this person's energy is too negative, this person's energy is too frenetic or too dark, right? So when I think of astrology, especially the study of the birth chart, which is the snapshot of the position of the planets at the moment of an individual's birth, it's particular to the individual. That is the blueprint of that individual's energy. So yes, absolutely, the energy, including the sun sign, but it's more than just the sun sign, right? That absolutely influences how we parent. I'm a Gemini sun, and I have known to be a little inconsistent sometimes in my parenting. I also love to negotiate. My kid loves to negotiate, and I like to negotiate with him. And I talk to people who say, you never negotiate with kids. Well, that's not how I parent, because I think negotiating and working things out with people for mutually beneficial outcomes, I think that's a great life skill. So my kid and I negotiate all the time. It's like our second language. So, for example, yeah, absolutely, it influences our parenting, definitely.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that you're a Gemini parent. Well, I'm a Virgo parent. So
okay.
I guess, I asked you that question and I thought about it. And I'm like, I have a Gemini son who's my oldest. I have a Pisces son who is my middle. And I have a Sagittarius son who's my youngest. And, of course, we know that Right. Of course, we know that you parent your children differently anyway, individually, because they're just different people. But you're right. Just interacting with each of them is just totally different. My Gemini son, yes, he's moody, you know, and so I kind of have to, what mood is he in? Right. And then my Pisces son, it's endearing. He's emotional, but not in a unhealthy way. But, you know, I don't have to fuss at him too much. You know, I can just say, I'm disappointed in you. And then, oh, my gosh, he straightens up really quickly. I don't have to do a lot of, you know, lecturing. But then the youngest is my Sagittarius. And, he knows everything before I know.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he knows everything. As the Sag is the philosopher of the zodiac. Yeah, they are really good at reading people. Yeah, they are. It's a very interesting energy. Yeah.
But it's interesting, but I have learned to, because as in a Virgo, you know, we are very regimented, you know, we're rule followers. We have the routines and the systems and, you know, everything is damn near perfect, right? Not on purpose.
Oh, yeah.
But we do, right? But I've had to learn, I think just as in the yelling, I had to learn that I got to let up a little bit, right? Because they have to be who they are, and they are not carbon copies of me. Right? They are not. They are extensions of me, but they also are their own individual people. They have to make their own mistakes, and they have to do their own learning. And this experience, this life experience, is their own, right? And so I'm just supposed to be here just to support that, right? And not my own drama.
Exactly. No, that's right. That's the way I think about it. Like, our job is to give them a secure base and guidance, offer them guidance. And from that, when they have that secure base, they'll feel comfortable going out into the world and kind of like forging their own path, knowing that they can always come back to the parents for guidance. Even when kids are adults, the parenting doesn't stop. They're always going to call you. I mean, I have, you know, older family members whose kids are in their 20s and they still call them. I mean, the kids are married and stuff, and they still call them for advice. Like, and that's, you know, that parenting, you know, role never really ends, I think.
No, that's so true. Well, through your experiences and your setbacks, you have obviously demonstrated that you are resilient. In your opinion, what are the best ways to build resilience?
One thing I really like to focus on is kind of future thinking, which if you study kind of positive psychology, it's a big tenet of it. When you can kind of hold in your head this image of where you want to go, like what you want to achieve, how you want your life to look like, sometimes that's easier to make those short and midterm sacrifices to do the things necessary to get there. So it's a lot of future planning, because right now everybody's living in the moment all the time with, you know, you and I were talking about this earlier, with the instant gratification and getting things now. So it takes a lot to make those shorter term sacrifices for the longer term gains. But if you can kind of keep thinking, holding that image in your head of where you want your life to be and what you want your life to look like, that's helpful. And also a big thing I tell people is do things imperfectly. I talk to so many adults who are procrastinators because, well, I want things to be perfect right away. And if it can't be perfect, I just won't bother to do it. Yes, but that also holds you back. Like, I'm an author. The first 5-6 drafts of any book I write is not going to be perfect. I just have to write. But the book's not going to get written if I don't sit down and write something. So do things imperfectly. And it's okay to kind of learn as you go and make mistakes. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. So those are big ones. And a lot of the time I see parents, you know, correcting the kids all the time. And I think, man, if you're always correcting, the kid's eventually going to be discouraged from taking any action that's not perfect right away. Let them make mistakes, right? So those are kind of those are the main things I talk to parents about.
Well, Maria, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Can you please take the time to let everyone know how they can find your YouTube channel, or they can contact you if they are in need of parenting support?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Rowe. People can email me directly at maria@lawschoolheretic.com. That's my website as well, lawschoolheretic.com. And my YouTube channel is Positive Parenting with Astrology, with Maria Riegger. And I have a pretty lively, audience on that channel, a lot of interaction. And I have people requesting certain types of content all the time. So if there's a specific content about parenting or astrology you would like to see, you can email me or leave a comment under one of the videos on my channel, and I will get to it.
Any last words of encouragement for the listeners?
Sure. So what I like to tell parents is if you are really uncertain about how you should be interacting with your kid, like if you were going through a rough patch with them or a tough time, or maybe they're not being as open with you as you would like, I want you to step back, relax the rules, and focus on the connection with your kids, whether that's spending pressure-free one-on-one time together, just hanging out, just, giving them a hug, telling them that you love them, telling them that you miss them that day, that you're happy to see them. Focus on maintaining that connection, because you won't go wrong if you can maintain the connection and preserve the relationship.
Maria, once again, thank you so much for your time. I wish you and your family nothing but blessings and abundance. Please take care.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. You too.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Lifejacked, the Resilience Podcast with your host, Dr. Rowe. Are you interested in having your business or service advertised on this podcast for thousands of listeners to hear? Then please send me an email at lifejacked@email.com if you are interested in becoming a sponsor of one of my episodes. And remember to live, laugh, love, learn, and then repeat. See you in the next episode.